Welcome to the Well Off Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. I'm your host, George Almasri. Dan Illis is originally from a small town near Stratford and had an 11-year career in civil engineering when he began investing in real estate on the side with a focus on infill development. Eventually, he left his job to go into real estate investing full-time, to build new homes from the ground up, and to work with other investors to assist with their developments as well. On this episode, we talked about how his engineering background has helped him sever land and build new homes, using creativity to purchase two properties, sever off a portion of both to create a new lot and build there as well, his new Wasaga Beach project, and his water metering company. So there's a lot to learn if you're interested in building from scratch, building new homes. This is going to be a great episode for you, or if you want to learn a little bit more about severing land. I hope you'll enjoy the content. Make sure to share this with a friend or family member. We want to get the message out there to as many people as possible, and leave us a 5-star review. That would be greatly appreciated. If you want to connect with me to talk about multi-unit investing, I'm more than happy to do that. If you're looking at triplexes, fourplexes, and bigger, I'd be more than happy to share some information on that, some off-market opportunities, and we can also analyze deals together. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, WellOffX, or by booking a call on welloff.ca. Enjoy the episode. This episode was brought to you by Mortgage Dawn with Go Pineapple. I'm here with Dan. Dan, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
So I like to start off, as you know, asking about your childhood. Tell me about where you grew up.
Sure. So I'm from a small town called Tavistock, which is about 10, 15 minutes from Stratford. So kind of grew up in the countryside. Essentially, I went to high school in Woodstock and ended up going to college in London, to Fanshawe College, to their GIS and urban planning program. So that was a 2-year program. Ended up graduating from that. From there, I actually ended up moving to northern British Columbia, where I worked at a gold and copper mine for a little over a year. So that would be about 3 weeks on site and then 1 week off. So as a young guy, I was more than willing to live that kind of lifestyle for a little while. Eventually came back home to Ontario and moved to Waterloo, where I'm living now. And for the past 11 years, I've worked at a couple of civil engineering firms in Kitchener, Waterloo, before I eventually left and went into real estate investing full time. So
cool. Just to go back to kind of your high school days, why is it that I feel like I've had a couple people say that they grew up in whatever Stratford area and then they end up going to school in Woodstock? What's the deal with that?
So when you're living the small town life, you end up getting kind of dragged to the nearest city. So actually my town, if you look at it on a map, is kind of like right smack in the middle of Woodstock, Kitchener, and Stratford. So the kids kind of just scatter when it comes time.
So there's no like local high school?
No,
Really?
It's pretty small, about 3,000 people. So
wow.
It's a small town.
Okay, interesting. And why is it that you haven't, I don't know, I'm assuming you haven't invested in the small towns like that around where you grew up?
So I haven't invested in my own town, but I have invested in smaller towns. So I've invested in a place called Elmira, which is just north of Waterloo. It's notably bigger than where I grew up, but I think it's pretty small by most people's metrics. And I've recently picked up another project in Goderich, Ontario, which is another really nice small town on Lake Huron. So I have no reservations about doing projects in small towns if numbers make sense and it's the right project for me.
How come not in your own small town?
I just haven't found the right deal. I absolutely would if the right deal came along. Just hasn't happened yet.
Okay, fair enough. So what's your well, I know you were kind of telling me before we started that you specialize in infill developments and Severance and all that. How did you get to that? Were you always interested in doing that, or did you kind of get there eventually along the way?
I kind of got into it by chance to some degree. So the very first property I purchased was in Woodstock. And so the background on that one is my mom and her husband had a duplex in Woodstock. It was on a corner lot with a really deep backyard. And they were talking about severing off their backyard. Maybe they could get a building lot. The city said, no to that. They said, although there's lots of frontage there, it's not deep enough. They said the only way you'd be able to do it is to get some land from the house next door. Well, the house next door eventually ended up being listed, and I went ahead and bought it. So that was my very first real estate investment property. And I kind of bought it just because I saw opportunity there. And I guess to further to your question, having the background in civil engineering and urban planning and GIS, which is digital mapping, lent itself pretty well to this and kind of all my endeavors, just because I kind of watched other people doing this more from the consultant side over the years.
Okay, got it. So you end up with this property next to your parents' place.
Yep.
And what was I think I remember hearing this story. So I think eventually you kind of partnered with your mom, right? And split the lot and severed it.
Yeah, so I should clarify, the place they had in Woodstock was an investment property. They still live in Tavistock, where I'm from. But yeah, essentially what we ended up doing was we actually got 2 vacant building lots that we severed off the rear of these 2 houses that we bought side by side.
Mm-hmm. And how did that end up working out for you? Like, did you just make some money on that, or did you end up building it?
It was a long process. I'm much quicker at it now, but at the time, there was a lot of uncertainty since I hadn't really done it before. So those ones there, I bought that house in 2018, and then last year I finally actually built 2 houses on the 2 lots. So I built a pair of semi-detached houses, which took the better part of last year. I general contracted it all myself. So I was on site, managing all the contractors, doing a bit of work myself here and there. But yeah, it's a nice new finished semi-detached building now. Each semi is on its own address. So figuratively, I could hold one, sell one if I wanted to. And then what I'm working on right now is turning the 2 basements of those into their own separate units. Mm-hmm. So when it's all said and done, the plan is to have 4 units on what was formerly just 2 backyards of 2 properties.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. So just to kind of maybe try to visualize this here, you said 3 side-by-side lots?
It was 2 houses side by side, and they were on a corner, so we were able to cut off their backyards to get 2 lots, and then the 2 new lots that we got would front onto the adjacent street.
Okay, so that it only worked because you were on a corner lot, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so you had this corner lot, 2 properties side by side. You cut a little bit off the back of each property, and you were able to create 2 new lots, and there you put 2 semis, I guess, like a pair of semis on the 2 back lots. Did you try to get more than semis on there? Like, did you either try to go with townhouses, or did you try to maybe put like a 4-plex on there or something like that?
So again, I'm kind of trying to backdoor my way into a 4-plex through converting the basements there. When I was going through the approvals process on this, it was more 2020, 2021, and a lot of this recent legislation that we've seen wasn't in place yet. So there wasn't quite the appetite that I think we see today at that time, at least on the city's end.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the neighborhood there, is it all kind of the same style of home, or do you have apartment buildings? Do you have multi-units on the street?
There are other duplexes, but it's all low-rise, kind of either single detached or semi-detached. There are some larger multifamily buildings nearby, but in the right immediate area, it's just kind of semis and singles.
Got it. Okay. And you're just holding on to these moving forward, like for the next couple of years, or do you plan on selling the newly built semis?
I'm envisioning this one as a lifetime hold. And part of the reason why a project like this makes so much sense is that we were able to get that land for next to nothing by severing it off properties we already own. And that's kind of why I love this strategy so much, because it's kind of the cheapest way you can ever get land. And if you can essentially wipe out your land cost from a new build, you're already put yourself a fair bit ahead when it comes to equity and making the numbers work.
So the properties, the original 2 properties that you had, were they occupied? Were they tenanted?
Yeah. So both those existing houses, which we still own, just have tenants in them. And actually the 2 houses are decent cash flowing rentals in their own right. Mm-hmm. So it kind of goes to show what happens when you take action. You know what I mean? Because all of a sudden now this house I purchased just for the purpose of cutting its backyard off is, again, a pretty good investment in its own right.
And how did the tenants feel about that, losing maybe half their backyards or whatever the case might be?
They didn't love it, and they certainly didn't love all the racket I was creating in their backyard, building these 2 new houses. But when I would rent that house, I always made it clear as day to anyone that I was showing through that, okay, although the backyard looks like this now, you're actually only entitled to these first 20 feet of the backyard, and I am planning to do something with it someday. So as long as you made that clear and they were willing, I didn't really get any serious pushback from the tenants.
Yeah. And you didn't have to compensate them in any way or reduce their rent or anything like that, I guess?
Nope, and I laid it out in the lease as well, like in an X, I guess a Schedule B, that that the first 20 feet of the backyard is for tenants' enjoyment, and that the rest of it is for myself.
Got it. Okay, that's cool. So it sounds like it's been a successful project. Can you share with us some of the numbers? Like, just if somebody has a similar type of property and they want to sever the lot, what are the expected timelines, the costs associated with doing that sort of thing?
Sure. So the cost to get the initial severance ended up costing me just shy of $10,000. So that included a survey, that included lawyers' costs, and it also included an application fee to the city of Woodstock. So when it was all said and done, that ended up being a little shy of $10,000. Now I should preface that by saying I did all of that work myself. So I made the application. I represented myself at the Committee of Adjustment. And like I'm a drafter by trade, coming from the civil world. So I did a lot of like my own site plan drawings. I think anybody else doing this and hiring it all out should expect to spend maybe 2 to almost maybe even 3 times that, depending on how challenging the project is. So when that was all said and done, what happens is when you're granted a severance, they're going to put a number of conditions on you that you have to fulfill. And that's going to vary wildly by whatever municipality you're in. So when it was all said and done, by the time I was granted the severance and finished up all of the conditions, it ended up being around 10 months or so. I feel like I could have done it faster, knowing what I know now, but that's what it ended up being on that one.
Got it. What do you think the value of those 2 lots, the 2 newly created lots, would be if you were to just sell them?
In today's market, not so sure, but at the time, they would have been valued around about $350,000 for the
Each.
2 lots.
Oh, for the
2 lots.
Got it. $350,000. So it obviously reduced the value of the existing properties that you had a little bit because the land is cut, but then you'd be able to theoretically make up a good chunk of money if you were to purchase these like those 2 original properties from scratch as an investment, sever off the back and sell it. You'd probably make a decent amount of money doing that, or at least a return on your initial investment would be pretty significant.
Yeah, and I definitely have some thoughts on that. So when you talk about cutting off the excess property and it negatively affecting the existing houses, that is absolutely something that can happen and should be factored in. I got fortunate and that didn't really happen, but that was the product of a really hot market. So as we experienced in 2020, 2021, the market was running up so fast that the existing houses continued to go up in value faster than I could negatively affect the value. But you're 100% correct, though. There's a lot of these severance-oriented projects that, yeah, when you go and cut off a significant portion of the property, you are going to negatively affect the value of the existing house. And you have to factor that into your numbers. So, for example, if you paid $500,000 for a house and you cut off let's say a big side yard or something like that, and then the existing house appraises at $400,000, you can kind of look at that like you just paid $100,000 for that vacant lot you got there. Now, a lot of times the numbers will support that because maybe your vacant lot is worth $300,000, or maybe by the time you build it out, it's such a good cash flowing property that knocking down the existing value of the house doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, for sure. What was the original lot size if you know offhand, for the 2 properties you had?
I don't remember the existing properties, but each of the semi lots came in at around 250 square meters, which is somewhere around 3,000 square feet. They're not big lots by any means.
Okay, cool. And is this something you plan on doing moving forward? Are you going to continue to do stuff like this, or have you shifted since then?
I'm absolutely planning to continue doing more, and I've done more since that one as well. I've done one where I bought a property, I tore the house right down, split the land into 2 building lots, and then flipped it off to a builder for a profit. I did another one where this one was in Wasaga Beach, where I ended up buying a property that was 100 feet wide by about 150 feet deep. Was able to sever off a 50 foot by 150 foot lot, to which I sold both the house and the vacant lot. That one actually turned a really nice profit. And then I actually just picked up another project. That's the one in Goderich. And the plan there is to sever a vacant piece of land that's about 104 feet wide into 3 building lots, build 3 townhouses, each with a basement unit. So my plan is to construct 6 brand new units.
All right. So you just talked about 3 separate projects, a lot of information here, but just if we can go into either one of these, when you're buying these properties, it requires a lot of capital up front, right? You got to purchase the property, then it costs money to go through the severance process, knocking the building down, doing all that. How are you funding all this? Is this just like yourself personally funding it, or are you getting construction loans, that sort of thing?
So land is hard to finance. A lot of lenders, if they'll even finance land, might only go up to a 50% LTV. The other challenge you might have with this, when you have a lender on a property and you want to sever that property, you are now going to affect the value of the security that they have over the property. And when the lender can get a say, it can make things a lot more challenging. So when it comes to this, as much as possible, I like to try and do it without traditional lenders. So I've paid cash for a number of these properties. So some of that might be using a HELOC, using like actual cash I have, or like borrowing private money. That way it keeps the traditional lenders out of it. So for the one I did in Woodstock, I ended up using just cash and lines of credit to get that one built. But on this new one, I'm looking to actually go and get a construction loan. Going through the appraisal process now, I've got the land appraised as is, and should hopefully have an as constructed appraisal shortly. And I'll see where I stand when it comes to construction financing.
All right, cool. Is this is this something that you're doing to build a portfolio, or is this kind of a way to make income for yourself?
I'm definitely using it to build a portfolio. I love what I'll call the build and hold strategy, where you literally build rental units from the ground up. You have nice brand new units, and my intention is to hold them like long term.
Mm-hmm. All right. And why is it that you're doing this? Like, obviously, it takes a lot of work to build something from the ground up. There's a lot of fees associated, that sort of thing. Why aren't you just buying existing units and doing kind of the more traditional thing?
Because everybody's doing that. I find my competition is far less when you're willing to get creative, and I find the opportunity is in land. That's where at least it's an opportunity for me, I guess, because of some of the background that I have. But I think for anybody looking to do this, with some of the recent legislation changes, and it becoming more and more favorable to do build and hold rentals, I can see some serious opportunity when it comes to that strategy.
Can we just go back to your Woodstock project? So what did it cost to build those 2 semis?
So cash, like the cash out of hand ended up being about $845,000
for the two.
So that includes HST as well. So I'll touch on the HST thing quickly. So I'm by no means an accountant, but what we recently saw is that the federal government is going to remove the at least their portion of the HST self-assessment. And what the HST self-assessment is when you build a new rental home, you'll have to get it appraised, and you're going to have to pay the 13% HST on it. And what that essentially is when a builder builds a home and they sell it, there is HST involved in that transaction. So this was kind of the government's way to get their 13% on homes that weren't going to be sold. So So essentially, when that was all said and done, I was able to write all that HST that I spent building the two homes against that HST self-assessment bill. So although it was about $845,000 out of pocket, that doesn't necessarily mean that's like the exact build cost on it.
Mm-hmm. And is that just for the building? Is that including all your fees to split the land and all that?
I kept those fees to such a minimum that I didn't really factor that in. That's pretty much my straight up construction costs.
Okay.
And so I did have some extras on that someone else may not have. So one interesting thing with that project is it had a really, really heavy crossfall across the property. So I ended up having to build about an 8-foot tall retaining wall at about 70 feet long. Like, this thing was a mammoth and it was very expensive. So a lot of properties aren't going to have expenses like that.
How much was that, by the way?
Oh, it was like somewhere between 40 and 50,000. That was a challenge. And actually even building that in such a tight space was quite the logistical challenge as well.
What material did you use for that retaining wall?
I used what's called grande stone. So it's by a company called Permacon, and it's almost like Lego blocks. You just start stacking them in one row at a time, and it turned out looking really nice, but it was definitely quite the undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have, you said 845 roughly as the building cost. And did you get an appraisal on them out of curiosity?
I did, and the appraisal came in at 1.26 million for the two semis.
Okay. So with the land, so you started off, again, just to recap, you had these two plots of land next to each other. You split the back. The land itself at the time you said was worth about 350.
That's what I approximated at.
Yeah. And then you spend, let's say, roughly 420 grand per house to build.
Yep.
And it gets appraised at 1.2, you said, right?
1.26, yeah.
1.26. So it is a successful project. You're able to refinance at that point, I'm assuming.
I did. So I got an $800,000 mortgage on it, which is somewhere around a 64% LTV. What that did essentially is that gave me almost all my money back. Mm-hmm. The reason why I didn't push that any further, because I was very kind of unfortunate. So I started this in March of 2022. And as we all know, interest rates went up that year. Construction costs were through the roof. So when it was all said and done, if I wanted to try and get my maximum cash out of it, the monthly expenses on that would be awfully negative. So I was fine kind of just going after the cash I put into it just to kind of mitigate that negative cash flow.
Yeah. Okay. And the numbers look good on the in terms of cash flow when it comes to the two new properties. Like you're getting probably top rent because it's a brand new product, right?
I'm getting near top. Sometimes I'll maybe back off the very top rent to try and get more and better tenants through, and I did that, and I've got two really nice young couples living there. I guess the other thing we should chat about too is that I've got a bit of a negative right now monthly on it, and that's why these basement units are so important to get those in there. So one thing I'll touch on is I'm actually having some challenges on that. So where it's been very standard here in Ontario for quite some time now to be able to go in and finish basements into secondary dwelling units. And we look at some cities that are now on unit 4 and 5. On this specific property here, I've actually got the city pushing back on me and causing some challenges with regards to being able to complete those basement units, because otherwise they would have already been, I like to think they would have been done a long time ago.
What are they pushing back on?
So what I'm specifically being pushed back on now is parking. So most cities, from what I've seen, have updated their parking requirements to require maybe one spot per unit. Some are even less than that. In this specific instance, they're at 3 spots for 2 units. Now, where this gets really tricky is that I physically have the space. You're able to fit 4 cars in each driveway and then 1 in the garage. So there's physical parking for 5. But I'm not allowed to count the first 18 feet of the driveway. And I'm also not allowed to count the extra width of the driveway, because although you can physically fit 2 cars there, on paper they require an extra meter of width. So In the city's eyes, I only have 2 parking spaces. So right now, I've just been in talks with the city. They've been understanding, and they've been willing to hear me out on this matter. But essentially, I've let them know, like, hey, I've got these 2 brand new units, and right downtown, by the way. So like, this is going to provide foot traffic to a lot of the businesses right downtown, and some of the current zoning in place is actually preventing these from becoming additional units, infill units here, even though there are a lot of policies calling for exactly that. So I guess my point of all this, and this should be known, that although the province has come out with a number of much legislation that calls for a lot of this, not all cities are on board. And there are a lot of cities finding ways to drag their feet on this. And there are ways that cities are stifling investors from being able to build the amount of units that the province is telling you that you should be able to build.
So I guess you would require a minor variance in your case?
Choosing the right mortgage product isn't always about the lowest interest rate. My name is Don Chen, mortgage agent with Pineapple Financial, and here are the 2 things you need to keep in mind. First, exit cost. Does your mortgage product incur a high penalty cost when you need to refinance or make any adjustments to your mortgage, or if you need to sell your property? Secondly, equity accessibility. If you need to access equity that has been built up, does your mortgage product allow you to do that freely and also in the most cost-effective manner? These 2 things will put the most amount of dollars in your pocket and help you get ready for your next real estate project. I would love to connect with you for all your mortgage-related questions. You can reach me at 647-961-3281, or you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Mortgage Don.
That would be one method to get a minor variance for parking or for maybe a wider driveway. But unfortunately, the city hasn't been overly supportive in that. And the Committee of Adjustment, I have turned down some of those similar applications in the past. So I'm not real inclined to go make an application to have it turned down. And I certainly don't want to end up at the OLT over something like parking. So I'm going to trust that the city will eventually bring their parking requirements in line with what pretty much every other city has done around the province, and I'll be able to move forward at that time. And I am hearing some positive feedback that hopefully that is on the horizon.
So I had a scenario just recently, just had a hearing for a minor variance for 3 side-by-side townhomes. And we're converting to duplexes, and we currently have, for the middle units, just 1 legal parking space, right? So we asked for a reduction in the required parking for the 2 units to just 1 space, and the tenants were there. They were fighting it. They said they don't want this to happen and this and that, and the person that I'm working with just argued the case, and we got an approval on all of them. So I think that the municipalities, like, they're just following, I forget what it's called, like there's 3 rules that they're looking for. Does it meet this and that?
Yep.
And if it does, then they're all approving it. So I don't know, that would probably be the same case for you, I would guess.
It should be that way. Just unfortunately, I'm seeing some things that are saying otherwise. Like I said, I've got some actual decisions from the Committee of Adjustment that show them turning down those kind of minor variances. So I'm going to continue to be patient on it, and I'm sure I'll eventually be able to proceed.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we did, the designer that I was working with, he reached out to the, like, not the adjudicator, whatever it's called, and he asked them ahead of time, do you think the committee would support this request? Initially we were going to add a parking space, so we were requesting our minor variance to, like, remove part of the lawn to add a parking space. Then they came back and said, we don't think the committee's going to support this.
Yep.
So he said, okay, well, what if we reduce the requirement to just 1 parking space for the 2 units? They came back and said, yes, I think they'll support that. So You might be able to get that kind of feedback if you ask for it, right?
Trust me, I've asked a lot of questions on this one. They're being very sticky on it. Okay. So I have represented myself, and I've represented clients as well at the Committee of Adjustment. Like, I feel like I have a pretty good handle on how things go, and for whatever reason, I'm not getting a good feeling about this one.
Fair enough. Yeah, because then it gets really drags on if they refuse your application, right? And it's like I think you can't reapply for a certain amount of time and that sort of thing for the minor variance.
Yeah, fortunately, I've been successful every time I've put one forward. So I don't want to find out the hard way what happens when you get turned down.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Can we move on to water submetering? So that's another interesting thing
Sure.
that you do. Let's talk a bit about that. How did that get started?
Sure. Yeah, I have another business that I own and operate. It's called Water Bill Solutions, and what that is, it provides water submetering for multifamily properties of all sizes. I actually sell both in Canada and the US. So how I got into this was I have a duplex in Kitchener. It was just a run-of-the-mill burr project, and I ended up splitting electric on it. I ended up splitting HVAC, so I ended up putting in 2 furnaces, 2 ACs, and I completely separated the ductwork. And I started looking for a way to do the same thing with water. A lot of municipalities won't give you 2 public water meters, which leaves you to submeter it yourself if you want to pass water costs back to tenants, and especially if you want to do it in a manner that actually reflects how much water they're using. So I found this system made by a manufacturer out of the US. I purchased it, I installed it, and I thought it was great. I was able to log in to an account at any time, see how much water was being used for each unit. The system would notify you of any suspected leaks or abuses. I started showing other investors, and I got a lot of positive feedback. I got a lot of people asking if I could get them one of these. So what I did is I ended up connecting with the manufacturer, and they said they'd love to work with me. So I ended up creating a business around this. And that's kind of what I've been doing since is providing these units to again properties of all sizes, as well as using them in my own properties.
So how would this work? Let's say you've got like a triplex or a fourplex, and it's not you have 1 meter and you're just paying the cost. So what would you do from there if you want
Sure.
to split?
So there's a couple things there's some big considerations that go into this, and I'll start at the biggest one and kind of work my way down. It's essentially to track water for each of the units. The plumbing has to be separated. So what you would expect to see is in a triplex scenario, you'd expect to see 3 supply lines, one going to unit A, one going to unit B, and one going to unit C. Where the water branches off, you can install a submeter. Those submeters will read back to a central gateway, which publishes all the usage data, and then from there, you can pass those water costs back to tenants. Kind of the same concept as a lot of landlords might do, like a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split. It's kind of the same concept, but you're actually billing it back to the tenants based on their actual consumption. The nice thing about that is when they're paying for their consumption, they typically use less, and it will help your water fixtures in the long run.
Yeah. So, okay. So you have, let's say you are lucky enough that your property does have separate water lines going to each unit.
Mm-hmm.
Then this device, would it how does it connect to the supply? And also, do you need the internet in order to register all the information?
Yeah, you do need the internet. Actually, just to your first point, what I typically tell people is this. If you have, let's say, an old century home that was converted to a triplex, chances are the plumbing just runs wherever. It may not be practical to submeter the water in that case. Where this starts to really make sense is in a few scenarios. One, you're doing a major renovation and you have the ability to separate the plumbing. 2, in a lot of purpose-built rentals, the plumbing will either be separated or it will be reasonably separated, where maybe there's just a few alterations to completely separate it. And the last one is new construction. That is real easy. Just plumb the building with separate supply lines. So to your question about internet access, yes, you do. So there's typically 3 ways to put the units online. The first way would be to have your own internet package at the building. So that's actually what I do in my own properties. With cameras now and Wi-Fi door locks, I'm finding more and more investors actually willing to put internet at their property. If you buy an unlimited package, you can maybe use that to get higher rents and help entice tenants. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, and I've actually had a lot of people do this, is put it on their tenant's internet, which typically works fine, but it can become a turnover item as well. So if a tenant moves out, you may need to put it on the other tenant's internet or wait for the new tenant to move in. But the nice thing is these systems will still record all the water for the time that the internet is down, and it will catch itself up. The last way is I started carrying a new system that's a little more modern. It actually has a SIM card in it. So for a monthly fee, you're able to turn on the SIM card and have internet right to the unit.
And would that be like cheaper than getting, I guess, a regular internet service if you're just getting that SIM card?
Yeah, it's $20 US. So again, it's a US product. It's $20 US. So I'm sure that works out to about almost $30 Canadian, somewhere in there. Yeah, I think you'd have to weigh the differences. So if you put internet at a property and you can get some higher rents, maybe that's a wash. You know what I mean? Or maybe you're not messing with cameras or anything else, then maybe it does make sense to just use the cellular feature.
Got it. Okay. So this system is just tracking the usage. It's not like a billing system. It's not going to send an invoice to the tenants and say you got to pay this amount to this account.
I wish it did that.
So you have to still,
yeah,
as the landlord, manually, or maybe not manually, but collect the money from the tenants.
Yeah. So what I advise people to do, and this is what I do as well, is I'll give out an invoice to the tenants just to be paid on top of rent. And for the 4+ years that I've been using these systems myself, that actually hasn't been a problem even once. So what typically happens is either the landlord or maybe the property manager, they'll log on. They'll be able to see exactly how much each unit used. You can set the date range. So a lot of times city bills will have some random date range. Maybe it's like April 7th to June 19th. It's all over the place. You can log in, set your date range to the exact same as what the city's bill is, and then you'll be able to see exactly how much each unit used and then pass water costs accordingly.
So do you have to kind of calculate it sort of through a spreadsheet or something like that, or?
You don't have to calculate it. It's just there for you to read, right? So it'll just tell you the consumption for each unit. It'll show you in a graph exactly how much water was used. You'll see when there was high water usage, no water usage. So
how do you figure out the dollar amount to charge the tenant?
Couple ways to do it. You could create an invoice that reflects the city's water rates. The other way to do it is use it to split up the city's water bill. So use it more as a way to divide up the cost and pass that
based
along.
on kind of like a percentage, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have pushback from tenants? Like, do you feel like you're not getting the same amount of rent because they have to pay for the water separately, or do you find that it doesn't really make much of an impact?
I haven't had any pushback in my own properties, and actually to everyone that I've supplied systems to, I haven't received any negative pushback from any of their tenants as well. So I think when you lay it out front, I think for the most part tenants are pretty good about it.
Okay, I'm not sure if you answered this and maybe I missed it, but the physical unit that measures the water, is that something that you need a plumber to install, or how exactly does that get onto your water lines?
So for the water meters themselves, a plumber would install it. So what we do is when you purchase one of these systems, we'll get a whole bunch of information from you about your property. So if it's a 6-unit property, I'm going to get the names of the 6 units. So if it's A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe you've got an ADU in the back and it's upper, lower ADU. We'll get that information and set up the system specifically for your property. So when we send it out, essentially all your plumber really has to do is just install the water meters. They're going to be labeled for which unit they specifically go to. And then it's more or less just a matter of plugging in the unit. It'll all be set up to automatically read. You may have to put in a password if you're using Wi-Fi or connect an Ethernet cable, depending on how you're planning to get internet to it. But that's how it goes, and honestly, it's a lot more simple than I even thought it would be when I first started with this.
Cool. Yeah, that's an interesting system. I have a property that I recently renovated completely, and the plumber set it up so that I have 5 water lines in the basement that all have their own shutoffs.
Yep.
And he told me, like, I can meter this eventually, but in that municipality, like you said, there are no meters provided separately from the city.
Yep.
So I didn't really know what to do at that point. But it's good to know that there are options, because that can end up saving you quite a bit of money, really. The water is like one of the major monthly expenses, carrying costs.
For sure. I would actually say, as a user of these systems myself, the notifications about leaks or water abuses has actually been one of the best parts of it. I've had a tenant go to install a pool without telling me. One of those 2-foot tall kiddie pools.
Yeah.
Sure enough, I get an email about high water usage, and I went over there. I'm like, come on, guys. I'm like, you got to ask if you want to do something like this. It's going to kill the lawn. I had another one where tenants left for the weekend, and shortly before they left, the toilet started running like crazy, and the toilet had used almost an entire month's worth of water in a day and a half. I finally noticed I had a notification sitting there for me. I was able to go over there and deal with it before it continued to just blow through water like that.
Is that notification, does it come to your phone? So is it through like an app that you download or something?
So on that system there, it comes through the email. On these newer systems I'm carrying, I haven't actually experienced one yet. I believe it does come through the app and email.
Cool. All right. And then so you would have, I guess, through the newer system, an app where you can log in and see the consumption for every unit in the building, and you would probably have like an online system for that as well, correct?
Yep, that's essentially how it goes. You can log in, see exactly how much each unit used. I guess one other big consideration with this too is it's hot water. So if you have a multifamily building and you've got a central hot water heater, you can't really track water in the way that we've been discussing earlier. So what you'd have to do in that case is both the hot and the cold would have to be separated. And then you'd have to get a hot meter and a cold meter for each unit. I do have clients that have done this, and it works perfectly fine.
Wouldn't you need separate water tanks as well for every unit in that case?
So that's the other way to do this. So if you have a central boiler, you're going to need to track hot and cold. If each unit has their own hot water heater, you can just track the cold, because you're going to track it for each unit before it enters that hot water heater.
Well, even if you're just getting the cold water kind of billed back to the tenants, I mean, whatever. If you're just getting a portion of the water billed back, it's still better than nothing, really, because the cost isn't that high. Other than, I mean, the cost of the units themselves, what would that be anyway?
Typically for a duplex, it comes at around $1,700, and then for each unit, it's about another $200 on top of that. And these newer systems I'm carrying, they'll actually do up to 50 units, so you can do a pretty large building with these, and it's actually all wireless as well. So when we're talking about small properties, a lot of times you'll see the water branch off in like a utility room, and it's kind of nice, neat, easy to track that. But in some of the larger buildings, it doesn't do that. It separates further down the line. So let's say you've got a larger building. Let's say you got like a 12-unit building. If in each of your units, maybe it's under the kitchen sink, there's a shutoff valve that kills the water to that whole unit. Well, right there is where you can install the water meter. And what the water meters have, they're fixed to a little transmitter. So you'd put the gateway unit maybe down in your utility room, and all the various meters spread throughout the building will wirelessly transmit all the usage back to that meter. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it lends itself well to properties that even have more than one building, where you can maybe put the gateway in one building, put all the meters where you need to put them throughout the various buildings, and then they'll all read back to the gateway.
As long as they're all within a certain radius of each other, right?
Yep, actually the reach is pretty impressive on them, but even if let's say you were in a scenario where it didn't reach, there are repeaters that you could add in that will relay the signal.
So this system works for apartment buildings as well, as long as the water lines are separated for each unit, or like you said, there's a main shutoff within each unit.
Yeah, pretty much. If you can kill the water to an entire unit without affecting another unit, that actually means the plumbing is separated. Mm-hmm. And from there, you can go ahead and install the meters. I haven't done one yet, but these systems actually do things like trailer parks and commercial applications as well. So there's a lot of uses for this kind of stuff.
That's great. Because if you think about it, if you can offload that cost, the water cost in an apartment building, then that's going to have a massive impact on the value because of the cap rate and the way that these buildings are evaluated.
It can greatly increase the NOI on a property, right? Mm-hmm. So if I can make the argument that if one of these systems is the difference between you paying for water and you passing along water cost, I can make a fairly strong argument that just by installing one of these systems, it will increase your NOI to the point that it'll largely pay for itself. And that's even outside of like recouped water costs.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that's awesome. Is there anything else on this that we may have missed? I mean, also the cost you were mentioning, you said roughly $1,700 for a duplex.
Yep.
Plus an additional $200 per unit, but that's not factoring in plumbing costs, right? The cost to hire a plumber.
Yep. Plumbing would definitely be on top of that. So in a scenario where the plumbing's already separated, it'll take your plumber no longer than half an hour to install a couple meters. If, let's say you're doing a duplex conversion and you maybe have to run a couple new lines for maybe the basement unit, yeah, of course your plumbing costs will be up a little bit from that. So that kind of point you made there is very, very property specific.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we touched on your infill developments, your severances, sub-metering. Anything else before we finish things off?
Maybe we can talk a bit about opportunity in the market right now, because we're going through quite the market right now, and it hasn't been what we've been used to over recent years. So I've been keeping a really close eye, as I've always have, on the kind of the land and development market. And I've certainly seen a couple things over the past little bit. And one of the big things I've seen, and this isn't all that different from just regular houses, is that land and development projects are for sale in numbers we've never seen before. I made a post on this a little bit ago on the Wasaga Beach market, since I did a project there. When I was doing that project, I kept a super close eye on the market, and there was maybe 8 to 12 properties, vacant lots or little development projects for sale at any given time. When you go and look at realtor.ca and at the Wasaga market now, there's about like 70, 80 of these properties sitting there. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the days on market, they have been just sitting there. And I think what the big problem, there's a couple issues with that. Essentially what I'm finding is, similar to a lot of houses, people want far too much money for their development projects or for the land that they're sitting on. They're asking prices that, if you were to build it out, and let's say your build went really, really well, you nailed it, you got through it really quick, didn't have any real problems, you would still lose money on it. Like that's the prices I'm seeing on some of these projects. The other thing I've noticed as well is, and I've touched on this before too, is that when it comes to land, there are two kinds of comparables, and they have nothing to do with one another. What somebody is willing to pay to build their dream home, or maybe their principal residence, has really no bearing over what an investor or a builder can pay. But everybody that's selling a development project or a vacant piece of land has got it priced as if it's somebody's dream home. And nobody's building their dream home on a 30-foot infill lot, right? So I find there's a massive disconnect between sellers and buyers. But there's opportunity here as well. And that one I picked up in Goderich is the perfect example. It had been for sale at $395,000 starting in spring of 2022. When I found it, it was listed for $350,000 in spring of this year. So keep in mind, it sat there for that amount of time. So where I think the opportunity is if you offer on a property like that, you make sure you offer on it at a price that will surely work for you. And it doesn't matter if it's a low offer. It really doesn't. Just make the offer. And what I'm finding is, where in previous years a seller might tell you to beat it, get out of here, they'll actually sign you back, or they'll actually entertain your offer. And it might not come to fruition right away. You might get a call a month later or 2 months later. Mm-hmm. Well, next thing you know, you might be able to lock up this property for a price that actually works for you. And that's what I did in Goderich. I ended up getting that piece of land, which was a 104 foot by 104 foot vacant lot, for $290,000 when they had it listed for $395 just the year prior. So definitely seeing some opportunity there with just development projects sitting, and the sheer number of them as well.
Well, there aren't that many people that are doing what you're doing. It's a lot less than like you mentioned, everyone's buying the single family homes and the duplexes and triplexes.
Yep.
Very few people are developing from the ground up.
I think too, when it comes to like purchasing land or maybe looking for a house that has some excess land to sever, is it's got to have upside to it, right? I wouldn't necessarily recommend somebody just buying a lot to build a home on it. What I would say is, could this property be further subdivided? With some of the new provincial legislation, can I build a triplex on this? Can I build a triplex with an ADU in the back? And if you're able to find projects or pieces of land that have upside that isn't always apparent to the average person, go ahead and make that offer that works for you, and things may work out if you give it enough time.
Yeah, very cool. So we covered a lot of different things here. I think you're gonna touch. I mean, you're gonna help people who are interested in this sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of value in it. Do you feel like there's any final points before we finish things off?
I do work with other investors to help them with their projects as well. I'm happy to speak to anybody that has interest in this, or maybe they've got a project on the go and could use some oversight. So I'm happy to chat with anybody that's either looking to get into this or currently doing it.
How do they get in touch with you if they're interested in talking about that?
Instagram is probably my most preferred way. My handle's illis_invest. Facebook works as well. And my website, waterbillsolutions.com, is another good way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include your information in the show notes. And thanks again for coming by. And it was great chatting with you.
Awesome. Thanks, George.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Well Off Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then I'd really appreciate if you left us a review on iTunes and let us know your thoughts. In order for us to get a larger audience, it's really important to have reviews, so your support is extremely appreciated. And also, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and family. Until next time, I'm George Almasri. Have a great day.